Hi everyone and welcome. I'm down here at my wormery, and my wormery is really just all these bins back here that I do composting in with worms. And the bins that I wanted to check in on today are the two that you see right up here. They're the oldest of my systems. The oldest is here on the end, and then as you work your way across you get to the younger and younger systems. Both of these systems are now undergoing a process that I refer to as horizontal migration, and it's really just the attempt at getting the worms out of the material that they were inhabiting so that they could get relocated into a new space, and then those castings that they leave behind can be harvested. So I'm going to get a little bit closer looking on these two systems. It's been 8 days since we last checked in, so I'm going to put on a glove and get these up onto the bench and see how things are progressing. Now you may have noticed and wondered, why was this piece of cardboard, which when we last checked in here was placed on top, why was that thing just sort of flipped up and resting up against the wall behind the container? Well, because I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that the last time we were in here, we did use this as one of the coverings in addition to this paper. And only those two things were covering up this side of the bin. And I just felt like, after reviewing the video from last time, I felt like this material was a little bit too damp. And if it were to dry a little further, then it might motivate the worms to move out a little bit more rapidly. So it felt to me like the migration process was being hindered a little bit by what seemed to me like excess moisture in here. So I figured the removal of one of those two coverings might help with allowing this material to dry off a little bit. Now, if you've got a really keen eye and you remember how we left this bin the last time we checked in on it, it didn't look quite like this, did it? It's because I did actually, in pursuit of addressing those concerns that I mentioned earlier, I did come back in here at one point during the week in order to try to help this process along. I didn't create a video about it that went up on my channel. I mean, I did create a video about it, but I was a little bit disappointed in its quality, so it never made the air, if you want to refer to it that way. So yeah, what I did here, just to summarize really quickly, was I came in here on the birthday, the 6-month birthday of the bin at day 182. Today it's 185, so it was 3 days ago that I came in here, and before I get my glove all soiled, why don't we get a little information board out here to run the numbers really quick, because there we go, the older of the two, 185 days, like I said, at 182 days of age, which equates to exactly 26 weeks, half of a year. I figured maybe we'd use that as a reason to just check in on this bin individually at its 6-month birthday, but I just really didn't like the outcome of that video, so I canned it, and I didn't produce anything about it or make it public. But what I did do during that video was I did come in here, I gave all of this damp material another agitation to hopefully let it aerate and dry. You might have noticed I also stacked this stuff up in the process, permitting us to have a little bit more space for the worms over on this side. And then I did actually come in here with my spray bottle too and dampen the material. So like I said, it wasn't really terribly interesting, and I just kept going back and forth on what do I do. I guess the main reason was probably, once again, the fact that it was the 182nd day of the bin's age, where I thought maybe we would just, by a slim chance, have an opportunity to bring a close to this bin, and then this would be maybe my fourth or fifth or maybe even the 6th system that has ended exactly on its 6-month birthday on day 182. But then I started thinking, am I that am I really that fixated on the numbers? Is there any real significance or importance to shoehorning the bin's completion date to some specific age or date? And it seemed silly. But I don't know why. I just have these weird compulsions sometimes to see numbers nice and round and even and stuff like that. Maybe because it's just easier to remember that way, and then I don't have to write it down onto a little green board. But you know what? I guess what we're already getting a little sneak preview into here is exactly the reason I came in here, to see if I can help, move things along. Because here again, pretty much on the opposite end of where the feedings have been getting placed, we've got a little worm, and even here I saw another worm hanging out here. And I would tell you the main reason is not because there's some sort of a delicious food item out here. I would say because the material is still quite damp and comfortable. And we start bumping into even more worms over here. So I do believe that maybe to a certain degree a delicious food item on one end of the bin where you're trying to round the worms up is partially a good catalyst to get the worms moving and attract them. But somehow I feel that repelling them seems to be the only way to get them out, because as long as this stuff is holding a good moisture content, there just doesn't seem to be a lot of reason for the worms to bug out, you know. And look at all these worms, you know. You might have noticed the number on the board, and I'll bring it back here, but I'll hold it with only one hand since I've gotten myself a little dirty here. 24 days is now the amount of time that we've been in process with this migration, and you know, recently I've had success getting worm bins migrated 14-15 days, you know, so this is already almost taking twice as long, and it appears that it will take twice as long as what have recently qualified as sort of record completion times of migrations in my systems. But this one obviously is going to require some time. I suppose if it was warmer down here in my basement, maybe the moisture content of this would be evaporating a little bit more quickly. I would say that the one thing that definitely is helping it dry is just the dryness of the air in general. So I do expect it to continue to dry if I just continue to leave it covered pretty loosely. But I think that just aerating this stuff is helpful, except I've sort of worked myself into a sticky situation here where I'm so high up already in terms of just the level within this container that you could tell I'm going in slow motion here, because if I'm not careful I could easily just dump a lot of this stuff right over the edge of the bin. So it's one of the reasons I usually try to cut myself off at a certain point and not let myself get in that situation where I've, you know, built up the contents of the bin to such a degree that I can't even get simple tasks in the bin completed without risk of making a huge mess and dumping the stuff all over the place. So I'm still going to just very carefully try to inspect the material to see what's going on elsewhere, while at the same time trying to break it up and introduce a little bit of air. Hopefully it'll help the material to dry, but I think we're seeing together here the fact that we're not really quite at that point yet. And I guess just reflecting more on what I've been doing lately in my bins. In the past I had done incremental haul outs of the worms that had over time collected in my horizontal migration feeding zone, as I call it sometimes, because it just seemed to me like it was getting so crowded there that it would make good sense to just get them out, make room for more, and let the migration continue without that sense of overcrowding over in that relatively small pocket of fresh bedding and food. But more recently I've been allowing these migrations to just go for the entire population, so I would not allow the migration to be considered as complete, obviously, until the material was evacuated. But I would also not empty the collection area until such a time that I felt like the entire process was complete and that all the worms were rounded up. But sometimes I just wonder if I'm shooting myself in the foot. What I'm reminded of, and I think I might have made reference to it last time too, was what I observed in one of my time-lapse videos where I had set up a bin where half the bin was finished compost in which the worms were released. The whole idea was to see, hey, do they all make their way over into the other end of the bin where I set up fresh bedding, fresh food? And a lot of them did, obviously, find themselves in the feeding area, taking advantage of all the fresh food and bedding. But it also seemed to me like a very large number of them remained in the castings. And those castings might have been nice and damp and comfortable, and those worms might not have really felt a need to get up and go, and they just stayed there. So I wonder if, because of the moisture content I'm observing pretty much everywhere in the system, are we just going to have to wait out the process until the stuff gets a little bit more dry and the worms tend to move out. All right, so I mean, that leads us to what do we do, right? What do we do here? I guess we could always use the bin that I've got over on the floor. I don't know if you noticed it before, but I'll just see if I can get a quick peek at it. Back there in the corner, I've got a bin that I built 34 days ago. And you may have even noticed it was on my list of bins that we might interact with today. So it is listed here because who knows? Do we start into the new bin with some of the red wigglers out of this system that have made their way over here? And then do we recycle a lot of this useful bedding and possibly leftover food if we can take it away from them in the process to get this rebuilt and continue on? I'm very tempted to do that. I don't know. It's a little bit contrary to one of the ideas I'd been kicking around about this bin for a while now, which was this concept of, leaving these two things together and just continuing to build and build and build this. And I was kind of treating it almost as like I think I referred to it as an in-place migration, where yeah, they're migrating into their new space, but their new space is, in their old bin. And then it could take as much time as it needs, if there's cocoons left behind over here, then those cocoons will have plenty of time to hatch and the babies to catch up with the rest of the crowd once they emerge from their cocoons. I mean, I definitely like the idea, but it just seems like we're, putting off an opportunity to launch off a new bin and give these guys a nice free range to start working in. What do I do? What do I do? Do I need to flip a coin? All right, how are we going to play it? Heads, migrate in place. Tails, move them out, migrate them into a new bin. I don't know. Tails says migrate them to a new bin. You know what? That was what I was going to do anyway. I wasn't going to leave it to a coin toss to determine our next steps. I feel like there's, that whole concept of weighing out pros and cons is while it would have been kind of a novel idea to kind of treat their new environment as being in the same location as their old environment and do this in-place migration. It feels to me like I would need to continue to expand the size of this space so that all the worms would easily fit in there without it being overcrowded. And then as a result of that, I would keep reducing the surface area of this that's exposed to the air and reduce its ability to continue drying. So it just feels like in the interest of allowing this stuff to be laid back down out eventually and spread out so that it can actually dry a little bit better, I'm thinking get the worms out of here, rebuild the baiting area, but it'll get reduced back down to its original size before we fed it and expanded it and fed it and expanded it. And that'll allow us to grow the size of the space that still needs a little bit more time to dry and get evacuated. And at the same time, this portion of the population can actually be released into their new homes. So that was kind of what I wanted to do today, and it is contrary to what I had hinted at in terms of a possible way to play it in this bin. But maybe my idea just needs a little further development before I can actually make it successfully work. So for now, this whole concept of launching a new environment in place with the old environment, I'm going to put that on hold for now and try to think it through a little bit better before we try again. So I think I'm going to start right into the relocation of these worms, and we're going to be launching a new bin today. And I did come down here allowing that to sort of be a decision I make down here, because I would have to be honest that when I came down here I wasn't quite sure which way I was going to play it, but I think I've talked myself into this just based on the condition of this material. It's still being so damp and so heavily populated. It seems like one good way to try to eventually get this thing to the finish line is to really, get this stuff out of here, get these worms that have already moved over out, and, help this stuff dry by spreading it out a little bit further and then resetting their baiting area into a nice vacant spot where there's no worms to let the migration continue. But we will be recycling as much of this old material as we can, because it's already teeming with all kinds of microbes and bacteria and everything that's key for creating a comfortable space that the worms like to be in. So maybe I can do sort of a quick and dirty light type separation where, basically you're skimming the stuff off the top of the surface, stuff that's been evacuated because of these bright lights shining down on it. until such a time that you reach some worms. Then you give it another moment or two for the worms to squirm back down deeper. Then what you'll be left with is some largely evacuated recyclable compost. Not compost, bedding. So this sounds like a perfect opportunity to play the video back fast motion for you to see what I did, but not have to endure the amount of time it takes. So I think I'm going to start into that now. I'm going to get a tray that I can start skimming some of these recycled bits of bedding into so we can rebuild here later, and then we'll get some food to re-stimulate the migration process. So as you can see, I've filled this plastic container up and I've still got so much more to go. I just wonder if I've really gone a little bit overboard on trying to expand this new section of the bin for these little guys. I mean, there's a good number of worms in here. When I pulled up a hunk of the food they got last time, there was just tons and tons of worms all over it. So I was just wondering, where are all the worms? Because all those layers I kept skimming off the top seem to have very few of them. So I think I need to get myself another container with which to continue this. But since the most recently added food and fresh bedding was all the way on the far edge, I'm wondering if we could just leave that be a little bit longer, and I'll try to till up this stuff over here, kind of loosen it up enough so that I could just skim off the top layer, but we'll give the worms a moment to recede down into it before I skim off another little bit. In the meantime, I'll go grab another container that we could do this with. So now this is a slightly larger container. I mean, I think overall it doesn't have the same footprint, but it's definitely deeper. It should enable us to finish this job pretty good, and then I'll probably need a third tray that we can actually put what's left that's actually got the worms in it for relocation. These little guys seem pretty comfortable right here near the top. These bright lights that I've got going don't seem to have triggered the type of diving that I was hoping for here. So whatever, I guess if some of these little itsy bitsy baby worms that are mixed in with this bedding we're going to recycle remain in the feeding area, we'll just get them next time. I really shouldn't sweat trying to attain perfection on this quick and dirty light separation. So why don't I go a little bit further with this same process, see how much stuff we can get collected up, and then we'll get the rest of it scooped out of here and relocated and launched into a new container. So here I believe we've got almost as much as what we had in the other tray. And look at all these little babies. Somehow the baby worms really attach so readily to your gloves. You can almost just miss them and not realize that you've got a little handful of little baby worms hanging out. So you got to be careful not to let them drop to the floor. That wouldn't be a good situation, right? So I've got so much recycled material, plenty to rebuild this feeding area with, and maybe by, letting the rest of this go with the worms, all this leftover food and stuff, will also help to reduce this a bit, so that maybe we could bring it back a bit, maybe reduce its size by about half, and then drop the level of this back down to not only be a more manageable level, but also spreading it out over a greater area, hopefully allowing it to dry a little bit more readily. So I guess, you know what, let me just really quick, I think that maybe by putting the other bin on here It kind of implies that we're going to work on the African night crawlers as well now, but I think since this transformed into a partial migration of the worms and a new bin launch, I believe I'm going to defer work on the other bin for another time. I just feel like I've gone a little bit over the allotted time that I anticipated for this. I guess in the past I've, done things a little bit differently, and there's always the different conditions too are slightly different in different situations. So it's it's always kind of a crapshoot what you're going to end up with as far as results on different things. But the one thing that's really clear in here is that the moisture level of the material in this bin was definitely a lot higher than the other bin that we're trying to migrate, or even any of the other bins that I've recently migrated in record time. So it does seem to me like this will get recycled as well, so let's put it in with all the recycled materials. We'll just put those partitions sort of back into place, or at least parts of them, I think. I still want each thing that's there to serve as a little visual aid for me to see where the two sections end and start, but I also don't want the partition to become an obstacle for the worms. So I think we need one more container of a pretty good size to pull these little guys out of here and relocate them into their new homes. So let me see what I can round up for that. Okay, I didn't want to hit record on the camera because I didn't know if this is going to work or if it's going to end up becoming a situation that I would definitely not want to have captured on tape. But I think that we've got enough remaining room in this larger container that we'd be able to empty out the first collected batch out of the shallow tray, because I believe the shallow tray would be just enough for us to get this relocation going. So luckily I did have enough space in the slightly larger container to hold all of it. So now we've got all the makings for a nice rebuilt feeding zone. I might even bring some fresh food for that down here. Check that out. There's a little cocoon right there at the tip of my finger resting on this piece of cardboard. It's just so interesting how, it sticks. I mean, how many times did I move that piece of cardboard? Picked it up, moved it here, moved it there, and that cocoon just stayed right there the whole time. Okay, let's get these little guys out of here so we can get them into their new home. But before we could do that, we've just got to get this feeding zone back in service so that this migration might continue. A lot of times in the past I've succeeded in really doing a good job separating the worms from the material they were inhabiting, but that usually requires somewhat drier material so that the worms can squirm down through it, but then you could also very easily skim it off the top, and then you're really left with almost nothing more than just a loaf of worms at the bottom of the pile after you've skimmed off all of the other stuff that the pile was made up out of. I thought I'd be seeing a whole lot more leftovers. I thought there'd be maybe a couple chunks of cabbage or a little bit of the, well, you know what? Cabbage is amongst their favorites, right? So the fact that there's really not a lot of leftovers here might not be that surprising. I thought I thought I saw little hints of bits and pieces of the food that this migration zone had been set up with, and I thought it was parts of the cabbage, but yeah, right there. I knew I wasn't imagining. So I'm pretty sure that that's one of the hunks of cabbage that we put in here, but there would have been a couple of them. Maybe this is another piece of it. And I believe that in addition to the cabbage, there was something else, something that I didn't think would last. So I think that might have been cucumber peels or something, but we definitely used stuff last time that gets the worms going. They like this stuff a lot, so as an attractant I believe it works quite nicely. So I'll have to fish out some more yummy food that we can restock this migration zone with, because definitely going to need some more. So I'm going to set these little guys off to the side, because it's going to be a few minutes before we can actually get them situated in their new home. Like I said, I want to get this thing reconstructed and back to work in collecting up the worms. And geez, there is a lot of worms in here. I'd love to hear people's thoughts on what we just observed here in terms of how many worms there are, because To me, it seems like a lot, you know. And it also makes me wonder if once we get to the collection of the remaining worms in here, will we have enough to maybe launch off a whole separate bin? It would be kind of nice to see this population split, but I don't know if we've already possibly succeeded in collecting the lion's share of the worms here already, and what remains is just a small fraction of this. I don't know, but it does seem like it'll be a cool opportunity to, you know, give these worms that inhabit this system more and more space by kind of splitting them up and putting them into two new bins, and then letting them continue to grow their numbers in the extra space. So I don't know, we'll have to see, you know. But for now, I think I gotta go get some food, so it's break time now. So if you're questioning if I did, he did. He sure did. He built a new dividing wall. Well, it's not even a dividing wall, so I don't want to call it that. It's, for me, I treat it more as just a visual aid to show me where, you know, the feeding area is and the finished compost is. And I guess it also helps to prevent the contamination of the nice finished castings with all kinds of bedding bits and whatnot. But the whole idea with it being riddled with big holes is to just really make it very easy for the worms to get through. And, you know, I was starting to wonder about the 3 layers through which each hole on the old piece went and whether they're still aligned and if it makes for easy transit. I figured maybe another helper here would be just some nice fresh holes, basically. It was the fresh holes I was after, not so much the fresh cardboard, in order to possibly also help with the migration. So now we did preserve a good bit of the stuff that the worms were inhabiting, so we are going to need some space in here to fit it all in. The food that I got to include with this can be seen right here. It's just a collection of different veggies that were peeled and cut to make a soup. So these are mostly peels of carrots and other veggies, and one of the staple feeding items in my worm bins is usually coffee, so they'll get some of that as well. Maybe even some fresh bedding to help with the isolation of the fresh material that's frozen with the material that we're recycling that has a bunch of worms in it. Perhaps we can, you know, isolate the worms in the material from the frozen stuff by just being careful and maybe utilizing some of our fresh bedding strategically. So now at some point I'll backfill here, but I don't want to create any undue pressure until we've got a little something in here already to hold it up. So I think it's time to start stacking in some of our recycled bedding material. So let's get a layer of that down in here. We do have a good number of large chunk materials that we're recycling here, which includes the old partition. Alrighty, as well as a coffee filter. But the rest of this stuff here looks like pretty loose, small size stuff. So why don't we try to coat the bottom of our feeding area with that type of stuff. Not that it's going to remain fluffy and loose and whatever. It's going to get matted down from the weight of stuff getting stacked on top of it, but I figured maybe it's stuff that the worms can more easily get through than if it was just some solid mass that has no perforations or holes or anything like that. That's why I didn't want to use any of these larger chunk materials down here. This little thing, what do? Do we send it with the worms that we're relocating, or do we keep it in here? I think we're going to put it over with the relocation batch. And we'll let that composting cork, which is going on years now, continue in that new bin we're going to launch momentarily. So yeah, I've just got to rebuild this thing here. I don't know, there's not that much excitement to that. There's no worms, it's just food and bedding. So let's get this done and move on with the release of the worms into their new home. Alright, what do you think? I think it's good. I think we've got a really nice feeding area that we've built here for these little guys. So at this point I'm going to compress it just a little bit, and then we can begin backfilling some of this stuff over here. Alright, that should hold pretty good now. So we've succeeded in reducing its volume a little bit, and hopefully with that we can spread this material out a little bit better drop its overall level, which is my main takeaway from this, is that getting up to the rim is not fun, you know, because it just makes you have to slow down to such a creep in order to prevent spilling that you just can hardly get anything done. So having a little bit of elbow room really helps a lot, I think, in worm bins. And, you know, getting things too full makes it awkward to work in, makes it heavy. So I think there is a good amount to target as far as quantity goes, and it's a little bit based on the weight of the material and a little bit based on the amount of room you've got to work in. So it does seem like on occasion I do push that envelope a little bit over the best limit that I should be following, and then I end up paying for it in the long run. Man, we're doing good here. This is getting done a little bit quicker than I thought, you know. I was ad hocing there a little bit, because I would have to say that this isn't really going like a lot of my migrations lately. A lot of my migrations lately, I think mainly due to much drier material to begin with, got done very, very quickly, you know. So I'm not sure why this stuff is taking so long to dry out, but I think that's actually a good thing, right? Because if you want good castings, they've got to hold moisture nicely, because that's what good castings do, and this stuff is definitely aces when it comes to that. But we've only got what do we got? We've only got a couple things to put back on here, and then this bin can just continue on. That's funny. Look at those guys. The way they're all tangled up, they look like they're mating, but they don't seem to have that interlocked appearance, you know, when they actually are mating. It's very obvious, because they kind of weird. It almost looks like they're I don't even know how to describe it. And I can't even describe it because I don't know exactly what's happening there. But as far as this bin goes, we're ready for it to continue. Fresh food, reset feeding area, brand new holes, larger holes, easier to get through, a greater surface area to further stimulate drying, and back goes only the paper. And at this point, this will be repurposed for something else. It's not going back on here because I want to see this stuff dry. All right, let's move on. Let's get these little guys back up on the shelf and let them get back to work. All right, as you can clearly see from where the sunlight is streaming into the wormery, it's been a few minutes since we took that other bin back to the shelf to continue. You know, I got a few things cleaned up and put away, and I grabbed a few other things that I know we're going to need. So I'm continuing now in the new bin that I built more than a month ago at this point. And to tell you the truth, I don't even know if I've checked in here since I built it. I might have come in here once or twice in the very beginning, maybe during the first week or something, just to see how the moisture level was in here, not knowing how much dampness it had. But you know what? Everything feels really good in here. Now, sometimes I'll build new bins with a little bit of food tucked away. In this case, I did not. So if we were to probe around through here, it's just going to be the same stuff through and through. Might be in varied layers. Perhaps there's more large chunks of leaves in certain areas. I don't remember exactly how I built it, but you can see it. It's predominantly a lot of this shredded bedding that I make out of cardboard, paper, small bits of stuff that goes through the shredder that I purchased recently. Now over here it seems like we didn't have total coverage because a little bit of the material on the very surface is dried out, but not too dreadfully. So it looks like we've created ourselves a nice little space for these worms to move into, and it's perhaps even a little bit bigger than a lot of the new bins that I start off with. That could just be because I've got this shredder that just chews up tons and tons of paper and cardboard, and I was able to make a great deal of bedding very quickly and easily. So these little guys are being released into a good sized space, but we're not here to talk about my shredder. We're here to release these little worms into their new home, right? So let's not wait any longer. Let's let these little guys loose. There's a good amount of weight in here, and I wonder if a lot of the weight could potentially just be a lot of the material that came along with the worms. My guess is that if we skim off a little bit of this stuff off the top, we'll find that a lot of the worms have burrowed down. It's a good thing too that we kind of excavated all these remaining food chunks with the worms, because they'll have a little something to nibble on here, and it won't be long before I come back in here to, you know, provide them with a proper feeding. But at first I like to just let them get situated in their new home, a lot of times even without any food in the bin, because I know that they're coming over with leftovers that they had from their old environment. Some of this cabbage still even has some of its purple color to it. And a lot of this stuff is just, you know, this mush that's surrounding the bedding is also possibly partially broken down food items. So I wonder how many worms we got in here. You know, we caught a few glimpses into them, and now their release here will also provide us with a little opportunity to see a bunch of worms. But it is our only chance to try to get a gauge on how many we're releasing. And I know it's a little bit difficult because it's, you know, somewhat obscured and hard to see, but whatever. I'm going to use this as a chance to try to guesstimate how many worms we're releasing here. So let's let these little guys loose and quit all this chit-chatting. What do you think? Alright. Okay, we'll make sure we didn't leave anyone behind. We'll look through that a little bit more thoroughly, but let's spread this out a little bit and give ourselves a slightly better view of how many worms we were able to collect over those 24 days. Looks like we were able to get a good number of them together here. Worms of all sizes, lots of little ones, which is pretty cool too. So let's let them settle in, and then we'll be done here. Alright, so it would appear that we did a pretty good job releasing almost all the worms out of this container. There were just 2 or 3 that I was able to round up that we're going to return to their friends and neighbors. Then this can head over to the sink where I can get things cleaned up. But other than a little bit of cleaning up and putting things away, there's not a whole lot else to do here. But there is one customary thing which we need to do before we call it a day. A lot of you probably know what that thing is, right? So let's get right to it. Here we go. It's the official christening of the bin. And we do that by creating a nice fresh label for the container and strapping it onto the container makes it official. This is my new red wiggler bin. Started today, the first new bin of the year 2022. It's January 12th today. And you know what? I just seem to have this nice piece of cardboard here that we can cover everything else up with now. Alright everyone, that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to give me a quick thumbs up before you leave. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.